Welcome to the Ideal Spaces Working Group podcast.
This is an Ideal Spaces podcast featuring Dr. Ulrich Gehmann and Grant Rainham.
Yeah, today we have a gentleman that's coming to us from the United States. Can you introduce yourself and tell us about yourself a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Luke Kelly. I'm currently a graduate student at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. I am in my final year of graduate school, earning a master's in architecture, and I'm currently in my school's classical architecture and urbanism concentration. I'm currently in the throes of thesis right now, but that'll all wrap up in May.
Well, congratulations. Basically, the podcast we're about to present will sort of focus on the storyline or the concepts around people like 15 to 25, 15 to 30, and what's going on in society today, the negatives and the positives from their point of view. So Ulrich, you can start with a first introductory sort of question. How's that?
Yes, I will start. As regards your peer group in wider sense, when you try to characterize their major characteristics in terms of aspirations, hopes, fears, what they are dreaming about, what worries them most, and how you, Luke, see all these tendencies in your peer group.
All right. Well, I think on the general sense, myself and my peer group, we probably take ourselves a little too seriously. And I think that can stem both from ambition and a little bit of worry from the future, but it's not necessarily that we're just worried about the future. I think we're just a little worried about uncertainty. We all want to be successful. We all want to do great things with our lives, especially professionally. And there's always that uncertainty of like, oh, am I taking the right steps to get there? There's no rule book for it. Architects don't generally make obscene amounts of money. So there's always that uncertainty of like, okay, am I doing this right? How do I go about this? Am I finding the right mentors? Am I listening to the right people? Does that make sense?
Now, that makes sense. I mean, do you think that the interaction you have, let's say yourself, if we can take you as part of your peer group, with, let's say, the established community and society that's around you, the generations before you, do you see that there's a breaking away from their thought patterns, or are you able to integrate their thoughts, or do you feel that they're sort of subverting your age group, basically?
I don't think there's necessarily like an intentional subverting of our age group, but I do think there is a disconnect between, just looking at the older generations and being like, okay, you're fairly successful. How did you do it? I don't know if that plan necessarily will work for us anymore in the newer generations. You look at older generations and it's like, oh, I went to college, I got my 4-year degree, and then I worked for the same company for 50 years, and now I'm all golden. It's like, well, I don't know if I could do that. We see it even in our own generation when we're starting up right now. The lack of even raises within staying within one company and showing loyalty to them. That's not necessarily rewarded like it was 30 years ago. So you absolutely want to look at the older generations, especially your folks. Every kid wants to look at their folks as the blueprint for success. And then you do that, and it's like, oh, well, like some of those things I absolutely want to emulate. But then other things, it's like, I don't think that's going to work. So it's difficult to be, trying to figure it out, looking at your role models and seeing that, well, it's not their fault, but it's just not working. So how do I know what to pick and choose to
think
give
that
me
basically
success?
that there's a different collective consciousness, a different identity with the upcoming age group, this young group that's going to be the future of society? Do you think there's really a basic difference on identity and collective consciousness?
Well, I think yes. Short answer is yes. The long answer, I think, doesn't necessarily have to stem from, oh, I don't know if I'm going about success the right way. But I think there's just so many different balls in play with this generation as opposed to older generations. And I think the sort of online life that is certainly more present in my generation as opposed to older generations is just changing the dynamic of how that generation works. Because, it's a new variable that wasn't there before. We have all these surface level interactions that I think some people mistakenly take as true connections with other individuals when it's only happening on a screen. So that definitely changes the dynamic of the younger generation compared to the older generations when they did not have that option. You can make the case of whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if we'll have enough time for that in this interview. That's a really big topic to talk about. But yes, it definitely changes things.
Okay, this is a very important topic, also related to our former podcasts we had. It's about online life, no? And in the end, online life, let's say, as a specific form of life, parallel to the normal life, the analog life we are leading as physical existences, with real connections, with real friends, with real relations. Let's call it real. Also, this old way of life. And the online life, what you see as regards your peer group, your age groups, what you see as the most important characteristics of a recent online life, both in terms of threats and also in terms of, let's say, possibilities or enlargements of personal expressions. And what kind of collective consciousness, if any, could be underlying this new online life?
So I think the biggest point to make about online life, at least in my point of view, is that I don't think it is inherently a bad thing at all. I think it is important, though, for those who engage with online life to understand it's a tool, or at least it should be a tool, to facilitate the real life. And when you use it as a tool to help facilitate your real life, like, most of my connections, relationships, friendships, I'd like to tell myself that it's all of my connections, relationships, and friendships exist in the real world. And they might be supplemented by online life, texting friends, calling family, and all of those things. Certainly engaging with the tool as it was intended, I'd like to think. But that it doesn't overstep and it doesn't, trump the real relationships. I don't have, like, the equivalent of an online pen pal anymore. That's not something that I have or I would like to see myself having. So when it's used as a tool to help facilitate real life, I think it's totally great. And not just within connections, but like in skill learning. I don't know how to cook very well, but through social media and all these online platforms, I've been able to teach myself a few things. So I think when you use it as a tool, it's fine. But when you don't use it as a tool and it does start to replace those real relationships, that's where I think it's a problem. And when people don't see it as a clear divide as a tool, but they see it as an equivalent extension of their real connections in real life, just existing in the screen, that's where I think it starts to become a bigger threat. Does that sort of answer things?
Okay. Related to this question of online life, at least for us as members of a, let's say, older generation, being more suited to terms of what you call the real world, there's a discussion today about democracy, citizenship, the need for place and the need for civic life. as one base of democracy. How this could relate, on the one hand, to this online life described? Also, is there a new kind of civic life emerging on this online life, or at least assisted by online life? See, for instance, in Egypt, the Tahrir Place demonstration, or is the civic life and therefore the idea of an active citizen as a base for democracy more or less endangered by the today's forms of online life and social media in particular?
That's a great question. I don't think it is necessarily threatened. We'll call it real civic life. I don't think it is threatened by online life, because I think if a online civic community were to emerge, that might be all well and good, but I think anyone in that collective identity is going to understand that there will be tiers that form within that community, and those that are only engaged on the online portion of that community, and then those that are actually engaging in the physical realm. You take any sort of institution now. I'm sure that they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on TikTok, and they have established their brand, their identity, their institution in the online life. And, millions of people can engage with that institution online just by following and commenting and messaging and all those things. But I don't think anyone, both within the online sector and those within the real life boots on the ground sector, see either of those two tiers colliding. I think there's a pretty understood divide of, those who are actually working within this institution, know the faces, are at the brick and mortar site of these institutions. They understand that that's a deeper connection in that shared identity, as opposed to those who are just interacting with the institution online. So I think if these online civic communities emerge at even a larger scale, that's all well and good, because I think it will help facilitate the real life impacts of this institution. But I don't think there's ever going to be that much of a blurred line, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've seen, we're based in Europe, of course, and we've seen here, just through talking to people in that 15 to 30 year age group, that a lot of them basically feel that their time spent on the internet, it can be quite a big sum. In fact, there was a report out of Berlin that a lot of young people are up to 12 hours a day on the internet or on social media. And basically, in discussing with other people, there's sort of this formulation of, like, especially people seeing things on the internet, things that they'd like to have, like the consumer society concept, the big car, the house, the beautiful figure, great hair, whatever. And when they can't attain this, they basically start to feel a little bit alienated by it all, and they isolate themselves. And at times that leads to depression, and then nihilism, sort of like a turn, blaming society for all the problems that they can't attain what they see in certain aspects of the internet. Do you see that at all in your peer group?
I'd like to say I don't see it at all in my peer group, but I think there's reality to that in certain doses in everybody. The idea that you were articulating of mass consumerism, and then not being able to attain all of these things that society is pushing, and then feeling a sense of nihilism and depression because of that. I would argue that that's not a new idea. It's certainly exacerbated by the ubiquitousness of the internet and social media. And now, you don't have to be walking through Main Street to see all of these different ads and marketing campaigns that are pushing these hyper consumeristic ideals on society. Now it's in the palm of your hand wherever you are. So yes, it is certainly exacerbated by that, but I don't think that's necessarily a new idea. So I think because it's such an old reality, that everybody is going to fall victim to it. And now the issue is harder on the individual to recognize it. Before it was, oh, I just can't go downtown because I don't want to see all of these ads and I don't want to see, all the things that I can't afford. And so I'm just going to not go downtown. And it was probably easier to be like, well, if I don't get my car, then I'm not going to have to interact with it. Now it's a much harder, demon to fight. Because it's coming at you at every turn whenever you're just going to check your emails. This happens to me all the time. I go to check my emails, or if I go to use the calculator on my phone, I find myself on Instagram and it's like, wait, okay, now I'm done Instagram and I'm about to put my phone away. And then I realize, no, I actually needed that for, a real tool like the calculator. So it becomes much harder for us to become conscious of those demons and be really active at like, no, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I don't want to look at that. I'm just gonna use my phone for the calculator. And it's funny, I see people, this is somewhat of a newer trend. They'll just be going back to their flip phones because, current social media and all the apps that are on the smartphones, they're so distracting. It's like, oh, how can I just need to get this away from me, but I still need to be able to call my mom, So you got the flip phone, but then, there are certain apps that are really useful. Uber, super useful. Having your email on your phone so that you can talk to, your job, not having to sit at your computer, super useful. And then, you'll get things like, I don't know if you guys have heard of the brick, where it's this physical device you have to tap your phone to it, it disables all of those addicting apps. So, yeah, I think it's not a new issue being distracted by hyper consumerism, but it's new to us how much harder we have to work in this day and age to break ourselves from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, would you say that your generation feels a connection with a sort of a larger collective identity, like a community identity, a society identity? And how would you describe that identity?
I don't know if it's necessarily like a larger identity of just because of the fact that we're online. Like, I don't know if anybody necessarily considers themselves like, yes, I'm part of the online identity. But I think they're able to have a better connection to their chosen identities, their chosen organizations and groups of people. Similar to what I was saying before, because they can so easily connect with them, even if it is on a surface level, over social media. And you can become better informed if you choose to be, and if you are doing it, I'll say through a critical lens, because yes, you could technically be informed by just going onto social media and reading what social media says, but is that necessarily true and accurate? So you do have to be very critical of it. But I think because people are now glued to their devices and they have so many different outlets connecting them to other people and other ideas, there is, I think, at large, a larger sense of connection to a collective identity if you choose to do that, and through the different collective identities that you choose to be a part of.
And how this collective identity could look at, or do we have different collective identities? For me, this relates to the point you made. Some online activities, collective online activities, may be well suited to foster civic life. No? Is there a relation between some kind of collective identity and fostering civic life to certain online communities or online activities?
I think so, and I'll use a specific organization as an example. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Institute for Classical Architecture and Art.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Perfect. Big presence here in Washington, D.C., and especially at Catholic University. One of their founders is our dean. So, before the advent of social media and the online life, they were still operating, especially out of New York City. And it was, at that point, it was mostly centered in New York City because that's where your base was, that's where the organization was, and it made a lot of sense. But now, after the advent of social interactions online, I think that is a great example of an institution that is utilizing social media as a tool to foster more in-person connections and networking opportunities. Because even sitting at my desk here in DC, I'll see notifications and even advertisements, I guess you could call them, of in-person events that the ICAA is holding, whether it be in Washington, D.C., or New York, or California, or Miami. And if I'm getting it, that means everybody else is getting it. So folks in the area are aware of these in-person events, and they go there and then they have meaningful in-person connections with people that share their values and interests and hobbies and careers. But very irregularly are there purely online events within that institution. They're not necessarily replacing the successful in-person events and connections with online events and connections. They're just utilizing the connectivity that social media offers to facilitate what they've always been doing. So I think institutions like that are a great example of showing that, look, if we use it as a tool, it only makes us better, as opposed to saying, oh, look, Zoom and Google Meet exists. It's great. Let's completely abandon all of our in-person events and just do it online. Because I think those are they fall so flat. And my school does these lecture series, I think once a month. And they'll bring in highfalutin folks in the architecture community. And when they're held at my university, everybody goes. It's a huge deal, and it's a great networking event, as opposed to, it's a great networking event if you choose to use it that way, but sometimes you just want to go and listen and hear them speak, and knowing that these fantastic individuals are coming to your university, it really elevates your experience. But then when they put them on Zoom, it's like, oh, I don't even feel like going. It just completely kneecaps the whole idea of the event. And I think that's where you see the difference of when you use social media to promote the event that's being held at Catholic University. Come to this event, see this person in real life, hear them speak. That's great. More people show up. But then when you use technology too much that it, waters down the event because you're having it on Zoom, that's when it gets messy.
No, I think your points are really well taken. Can we revert back to the beginning of the conversation?
Absolutely.
You talked about, fears, success, having a career. Can we sort of expand on that with you, and sort of outside of, let's say, monetary success and career, any other fears that you see present in your generation?
Outside of monetary, monetary is a very hefty thing that's weighing in a lot of people's minds. So I think departing from that absolutely is there, but more difficult to pin down. And this might be a little bit more personal as opposed to representative of my entire peer group. I can't speak for them. But one thing that I've always wanted and feared not having is a legacy within my career. There are folks, again, within the architectural industry that have incredibly fulfilling and financially fulfilling careers, as a partner in a firm. They've worked their way up from intern to partner at the same firm, and they're killing it. But at the end of the day, their name's not on the door. You know, they'll be remembered as the partner of this larger firm, and regardless of the amount of work and dedication and expertise that they have poured into that institution, you know, once they die, that legacy will likely not be remembered nearly as much as those that have pioneered a new company, started the firm, put in the blood, sweat, and tears of creating, whether or not it's as large of an institution, but creating an institution. And that's something that I've always thought of as, you know, regardless of, you know, the work, the money, all that thing, all those realities, I really want to have a legacy that follows the work that I will eventually do. I mean, the way I see it, if I'm going to work for the next 50 years, I might as well build something that lasts longer than just me. I don't ever want to force my future children into a career path, but man, wouldn't it be so great if, you know, I start a firm and then my kids take it up after me and continue that legacy, not only just after my life, but, you know, hopefully after theirs, and establish something just larger than one person's body of work. So I think there's a fear in spending your whole, you know, adult life working, and then it stops when you stop. When you could have spent your whole adult life working, but then that work continues working for, you know, your family name, your legacy, you know, long after you're gone.
This also relates, that's a good point you made. This also relates to tradition and to architectural tradition and heritage. So if you see heritage then being more than just a tradition, but is something that I have to adopt actively and to continue actively, related to the point of architecture, placemaking, citizenship. This could be a very important heritage that you, as Luke, in your work, leave something that is more than just you and will not vanish when you finish working.
Right. I mean, and I try to have that idea as much as I can. I'm not perfect at it, and there's absolutely room for improvement. But I try and have that ideal stem into my work. Now, I know I'm only doing academic projects at the moment, and, you know, I haven't built anything. Unfortunately, I want to so badly. But even in the academic projects where, you know, your professor hands you a program and you have to turn that into a credible design, I try and think of this as like, okay, yeah, I mean, the building that I'm designing right now, it will satisfy the program and it will be a successful academy, museum, market hall, whatever it is that I'm designing. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to think proactively of, well, if I'm going to design a building and have some wealthy client pay for it, as they always do, how can this building last long enough so that in 100 years, maybe it isn't an academy anymore, maybe it's something else? And have I, as the architect and the designer, operated with enough foresight to design a great building, period, that at the first stage of its life can be used as a successful academy, but then 100 years later, it could be used as a museum, and 100 years after that could be used as a dormitory. Trying to always act not just for, you know, my lifetime in the short term, but, you know, at least set things up to be successful for generations after me. I think that should be the goal. I know I'm probably not perfect at it, but I think the world would be a much better place if people were constantly operating in that idea of, okay, yeah, it's got to work right now. Obviously, it has to work right now. But how can we set things up so that they work 300 years from now? So we don't have to do some major remodeling or major demolition. You know, I understand a few walls might have to be moved. Absolutely. But on the whole, it should work for much longer than we need it to.
And basically, like 20 years from now, 30 years from now, in your view, what will be the vision of the city, the space in the city? Is there going to be massive changes, do you think? Is the city going to become more of a comfort zone, because we see in a lot of cities, the central cores aren't functioning and these things? And you see the future of the city still being key to community.
I think, yeah, in the short answer, yes, the city will always be a center for community. When you have that many people living collectively together, of course, it has to be a beacon of community. And if cities aren't a beacon of community right now, that's an issue. I was thinking about this over the summer. I was in a course talking about, the ideal city and how it directly correlates to human well-being, and thinking about the future and even the past at the same time of modern cities are fairly car centric, and trying to work out in my mind, like, okay, what if you successfully plucked the car out of the city, whether or not in generations ago, before the car existed, or generations to come when maybe the car is completely transformed from what we understand it as today. But then learning that the street and the linear street being thought of and arrived at because of how humans function and how they're built and their linear path of sight and their linear path of travel, even on foot. Like, so I don't think necessarily that the city formally will change quite drastically. I think we will always be working off of a public right of way being the sidewalks and the streets, and then the private sector of the city being the buildings. I think that will stay because I think it's been that way for hundreds of years, and there are pretty direct formal parallels you can draw between modern cities and ancient cities, and so I think that's there to stay. I think some of the differences that we might see, and you made a great point of, the dense urban cores are no longer working, and they're not really serving the people as best they could. You think of buildings like those empty office buildings in New York, which have the super deep floor plate and then the really skinny core. And it's, with people not necessarily working in person anymore, you have these buildings that can't really easily be transitioned to other usable building types. So I think those will probably be phased out in the next few decades. We'll be building less of those. We'll be building smaller scale, Leon Creer type buildings, 5 or 6 stories, mixed use buildings. And I think those are great. I'd like to see the city obviously retain its streets and squares and block DNA, because I think that's worked for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But I think we're going to see a smaller vertical scale disposition to cities in the future. I would hope that would facilitate more community spaces, as again, city needs to be a beacon of community. But I think those giant esoteric empty towers, they're not doing anybody any favors anymore.
So basically, if I was to say to you, you're an architect, Luke?
Well, I'm an architectural designer, yes.
Architectural designer, sorry. Please.
Well, I'm just not licensed yet.
Oh, you're getting there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But if I was to say, what's your vision of the perfect space within the city?
Ooh. That's a tough one. I think the perfect space, it would certainly have to be some sort of urban park. And I don't necessarily think it has to be so large of an urban park like Central Park or even Meridian Hill Park in Washington, D.C., where the scale of the park is so big that when you're walking within it, you can very easily forget that you're in a city. I think it's lovely in those spaces, but I don't think that would constitute the perfect community center in an urban space. I think it's nice to be in a park, to be intermingling with nature and soft greenery and all of the benefits that parks offer in an urban space. But I don't necessarily think you need to forget that you're in a city. I think there is this perfect ratio, and forgive me, I haven't figured it out yet, where the green space is big enough for you to enjoy it, and not just you to enjoy it, but for all of your neighbors to be able to enjoy it, that you can get your own little slice of privacy and tranquility, that it isn't too programmed enough that you can use it however it is that you deem fit in that moment in time, but that you still know that there's, an urban environment around you. And that urban fabric that forms the shape of the park, it's not those hollow, esoterically large office towers. It's, 4-story row homes. I think that's starting to find the perfect bit of urban space in Stanton Park in Washington, D.C. That starts to scratch the surface. The park's big enough that, most people can use it. It's not over-programmed. You can really choose how you use that space. But you understand that you're in the Capitol Hill neighborhood in that park. Even if you're not on the edge, you can still see a few pieces of urban fabric peeking out. It's not just residential, so it's not really a dead zone. There are more commercial and civic buildings scattered around the perimeter, and those are obviously a little taller. They peek out over the skyline a little more. I don't want to say it's the Goldilocks just right, but I think there is an element of just right scale. You're not in a dense downtown, but you're not in the suburbs either. Your green space isn't a plaza with a planted tree, but it's not Central Park either.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great concept. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, it's a great concept. It relates to the good old inherited idea of the ideal city to be built for its citizens in the end. No?
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting.
One of the things that I have come to learn from my university, one of my professors, David Marinek, he really drove this point home. When you're operating within a traditional or even specifically classical ideology when you're designing is, when you're approaching a design problem, whether or not that be, a single building or even if you're designing quarters of urban space, you don't have to design from scratch. You are blessed enough to work within a working continuum that, stretches thousands of years. And it's great that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. People much smarter than I have worked out this problem before, especially how to parcel up a city, how to scale urban spaces, how to intermix private residential parcels of land and larger civic parcels of land into a pleasing cohesion that really does work for the citizen. So it's great to know that we're not trying to figure this problem out for the first time for ourselves right now. We get to look at what people have done for thousands of years and not just copy and paste it, but see what they've done, digest it, understand it, and then make it better. Which I don't think architecture students or designers necessarily always think about when they're confronted with what is almost always an age-old problem. It's, look at what's been done before. You can find some great ideas.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point in terms of heritage and how to transform the heritage into something really new.
Mm-hmm.
Also for new communities. It's a good point. Okay.
So, this has been a very interesting discussion, and we really thank you for your points and your insights. And we wish you great success with your coming career as well. And hopefully in the future we can talk again and expand on this concept with you.
Yeah, and you can also have a look at our website, Idle Spaces. We are interested in people discussing and collaborating with us in this sense of also developing concepts and projects and discussing with us. So this would be really helpful, no? And I think also needed in terms of this positive classical architecture. Many thanks, Luke.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.